All right, so welcome back, everybody, and I hope you have enjoyed the videos developed by the communication team led by Claire-Marie Martis, and you could also hear her voice. And I think these 4 videos explain beautifully the infrastructure that we have been developing over the last, I should say, 10 to 15 years in Europe. So let's move on with the program, and it's really a great pleasure to welcome Irene Norstedt, who is the director of the People Directorate, DG Research and Innovation. And Irene has a very long career at the European Commission with a lot of experience. Irene has been setting up IMI. She did a fantastic work on rare diseases, and I think it's fair to say that Irene is the mother of all initiatives on personalized medicine. And there's one thing that we have in common, or at least many of us have in common with Irene, and that is that she was sucked into the pandemic over the last year and a half, Irene. So we've all suffered from that. And therefore, we are extremely grateful that despite your extremely busy agenda, you accepted our invitation to join the Ecraid launch meeting today. And as a title, Irene proposed the EU lessons learned for public health research policy and building future preparedness and response. And we are really looking forward to your presentation, Irene. I thank you for accepting the invitation once again. Irene, you're mute.
Indeed, two microphones to turn on and off. I always forget one. So thank you very much, Herman. It's very nice to be here, and thank you very much for inviting me. And as you're saying, it's been an incredibly busy, year and a half. We're soon at 2 years, I would say, with the response to the COVID-19 pandemic. But I mean, we had started actually before that to actually, build up our experiences and modus operandi and how to deal with crisis and the many issues we have on the horizon. So I'm very happy to tell you a little bit about what we have done over the years and also a little bit the thinking about the future here. Some of the lessons that we have had and challenges that we have had in R&I funding is, we have really learned that, yes, we need to act on the spot, but what's really important is that we need to plan and invest in research and innovation before the crisis occurs. And why do we say that? Well, of course, as you well know, because you are all in this field, it's challenging to predict exactly what the next crisis will be and when it will come. So therefore, we really need to be very much at the forefront and to invest very broadly in a number of areas that we rapidly can identify what is needed at the right time. It also has shown the need to have financial tools that rapidly can be mobilized. The way we normally work with our planning and investments is we work with multi-annual work programs. And that means that we are a couple of years ahead of the curve of sort of when the calls will be launched in our thinking on what would be the priorities. And we have seen that we also need to have a lot more flexibility in terms of also doing, what shall I say, on-the-spot financing. And this, I think, we have actually been able to do now in the COVID-19 crisis. And something else that we also have seen is, of course, the very huge importance in promoting data sharing. And data sharing across fields and across stakeholders and across services, and of course at the global level as well. Because this really speeds up the research and innovation that is necessary. And I think that this is something we need to have. It's a big lessons learned here in how to do that. So this is another big important lesson we have learned with the COVID-19 pandemic. And of course, also the importance of dialogue and collaboration. And we have also built, I should say, in addressing COVID-19, we have also really built on investments that were done in previous years. So we didn't really start from scratch, and many of you know that because many of you have been involved in some of the activities that we have done over the years. So if I could have the next slide. So we have actually invested 4.1 billion euros over a period, it's almost a 20-year period, in infectious diseases R&I. And this has really been in investing in clinical networks, research infrastructures, epidemiology, modeling, etc. And we have also learned actually how to do emergency calls. Because this is something we really learned with the Ebola and the Zika epidemics. We kind of figured out a little bit how to put in the opportunity in our work programs to mobilize funds to really react very swiftly. And we should specifically mention maybe the Combacti and the Prepare projects, which were funded in 2013-14, because they have really been very, very important stepping stones in our thinking and, you know, really in how to design and move forward in the area of infectious diseases. Next slide, please. So, you know, if we go back to the COVID-19 pandemic, so here we have indeed invested heavily. We used all the instruments we have at hand. You know, we have the European Research Council, we have the European Innovation Council, we have the European Research Infrastructures, we have, of course, the collaborative research program that you are familiar with, and we also have the European Institute of Technology. And all of us have really been investing very rapidly and swiftly to deal with the COVID pandemic. Next slide, please. So what was really important here was in particular the establishment of the European COVID-19 data platform. And I think all of you are familiar with this one. And I think this has been one of the true successes, and that we really should build on in the future preparedness. Because this platform has proven to be a very useful tool for share data in a fair and equitable way, and also, of course, in an open access policy. And I think that is really, really important. Next slide, please. So what we also have, and what was operating already before the COVID pandemic, was, of course, the GlobeWithR network. And I think many of you also are familiar with this one, because through this one, we are coming together as research funders across the globe to, together with WHO, really worked together with those partners across the globe to identify, you know, where our knowledge gap and map out the research priorities, and also decide on the critical research to be addressed. What's really important to think when we come into a situation like COVID-19, and I'm sure that we will have future crises as well, is really complementarity. We do not have endless resources, and we really need to work together much more to make sure that we invest in complementary research, but that we also make sure that we work together. What we also did, therefore, at the European level was really to cooperate with between the Commission and the national research ministries to agree on the HERA versus Corona action plan. This was quite an important work, because this was really the first time that we really came together in a very strategic discussion and at the very high level strategic mode, in terms of working out what were the most urgent areas that we needed to act on. And there were 10 priority short-term coordinated actions that were agreed. And I think that this was another very, very important learning for us in terms of looking into what we should do at European level. And also, we know that there is a lot of research investments at national level, but it's also important to think in terms of, again, of where do we do what, and how do we invest most effectively, how can we share data, and how to make sure that we have complementarities of what's being invested in. Next slide, please. So we have invested very special actions in 2020 as part of the 1 billion pledge for coronavirus research. And in a big portfolio of projects that we do have in treatments, epidemiology, diagnostics, vaccines, modeling, socioeconomic impact, etc. And also what I should mention that in addition to ERC, EIC, and EIT, also our partnerships, you know, Innovative Medicines Initiative very well, and also the European and Developing Countries Clinical Trials Partnership also invested. So we had a big portfolio of investments that were being done more or less simultaneously. And also, we should also mention the INNOFIN, the Infectious Disease Finance Facility, that as was crucial actually for investing and supporting the BioNTech and CureVac vaccine developments. This is an instrument where we work together with the European Investment Bank to make sure that very high-risk investments can be done where we provide the security for those investments. As we all know, the success of BioNTech, CureVac unfortunately didn't have the same efficacy as the others, but it was still a worthwhile investment. And I'm sure that we will build more on the experiences of CureVac as well for the future. And this is exactly what these investments through the INNOFIN is made of. These are high risk. You may succeed, but you may also fail. Next slide, please. So what has also been realized is, of course, the big need for clinical trial networks. Here we talk about infectious diseases, but I would say that we actually have a need for all therapeutic areas in Europe for this. Because what we have seen here is very much that we are excellent in the science and the innovative ideas, but very often they move out and the clinical trials are being made abroad. So this is a really, really super important area that we will further continue to build on. And of course, in this period, we have funded and the VACCELERATE has been set up. Of course, we have the EU response and recover that both are building on other trials. So I think this has been really, really worthwhile investments. And in particular, this trials coordination board that also brings in external stakeholders for the dialogue. And I mean, in particular, the support that we have been given from the European Medicines Agency, from ECDC, but also from WHO and other authorities has been really, really crucial here. And I think that this is a big learning that we have that we really need to take with us for the future. And we should further work on the establishment of these clinical trial networks. The innovation may happen, as we know, randomly. It can happen anywhere. But what we would be able to do if we have these networks very well established, up and running, ready to take on, is to rapidly pick up these new big ideas and to make sure that they can go into the clinical trials as quickly as possible. Next slide, please. I've already mentioned the partnerships, and both of them really, the EDCTP and IMI. And they were also very crucial, I would say, in further investments. And here we had very close collaboration, again, in identifying who should invest in what do we invest in collaborative research, what would IMI do best, and what would EDCTP do best, again, so that we use the synergies between programs and maximize the complementarities of what we do. Now we are working on follow-up partnerships, and we are in negotiations with the member states and with European Parliament on a follow-up to European and Developing Clinical Trials Partnership, we call it EDCTP 3, and Innovative Health Initiative, which builds on IMI. Both these partnerships are, however, breaking with the past quite significantly. EDCTP 3 was previously funded through what we call an Article 185, which is one legal basis. And we are now moving over to an Article 187 legal basis, and this doesn't mean anything to you. But what it does allow us to do is to go into a partnership which is more similar to the one that you may know that we have used in IMI. So both these partnerships, EHE and EDCTP3, will have the same type of organization, where you will have a specific legal entity that brings together the partnerships and manages the program. So in EDCTP3, our partners will be the EDCTP Association. But what we have also done is that we have set up a pocket of money for other funders to come in, and of course, in particular, then for specific clinical trials. And for those of you who are not so familiar with EDCTP, that is the European and African Clinical Trials Partnership. So it will be specifically dedicated for late-stage clinical trials in sub-Saharan Africa. And there, I think that for your network as well, this will be quite an important collaborator for also extending out into arms that could be run in the sub-Saharan Africa context. And as I mentioned, with this additional pocket of money, which is sort of set aside there, that would allow industry or foundations to come in and co-invest with us for these specific trials. The Innovative Health Initiative, which is building on IMI, will also be very different and thus will not look at all as its predecessor IMI, because here we are bringing together the full set of health industries. So we are now talking about the medical devices, the imaging industry, the digital industry, the pharma and the vaccine industry will come together and to better see how we can have a technology integration. We all know that this is a very strong trend in terms of building together, screening programs with diagnostics, with therapy, or maybe a preventive measure, and then maybe to have sensors, monitors to collect real-world data to follow up on the safety and the efficacy and the effectiveness of these interventions. This partnership may also look more in terms of other type of actions, such as hospital management, the collection of data, etc. So it will be quite different from what we have seen in the past. So I think also here for your project, for Ecraid, it will also be important to keep an eye on both these partnerships and see how synergies can be sought with actions that will also be launched in these partnerships in the future. As I mentioned, we are in the negotiation now, and we do hope that we will have the final decisions of these partnerships towards the end of the year so that they really can be set up and become operational early next year. Next slide, please. So during the time of the COVID, we have also had quite a lot of work on the strategic level, and you have seen the vaccine strategy that the Commission published on the 17th of June, which really aimed for accelerating development, manufacturing, and deployment of vaccines against COVID-19. And we have also seen the therapeutic strategy, which came on the 6th of May, which were really dedicated towards supporting the therapies development. Of course, when COVID started, there was so much focus around the vaccines, but it was, of course, also recognized that therapies has a very, very important role to play. And we all know that before we had the vaccines, I mean, therapies is what we have, and you know this better than any because you did impressive work in this area with the clinical trials that you were running. Next slide, please. So now we will also have a new kid off the block, and actually the announcement of HERA will come later this week, and HERA will then be set up for the rest of this year in view of really being operational early next year. So you will need to stay in tune and follow the announcements coming later this week in terms of HERA. Which then will be, as the President announced in the last year's State of the Union speech, that we need to set up sort of a European BARDA. Now, of course, we are not United States and we do not have the same setup. So HERA will, of course, look slightly different than BARDA because of the way we operate in Europe. But before HERA, is established, we already had the HERA Incubator set up, and that came in February this year. And here, this was really launched to tackle the short to medium term threats of COVID-19 variants. And of course, here you recognize that the setup of the VACCELERATE network was really a big part of, from our side, in terms of actions in this HERA Incubator work. And of course, work are ongoing here, on all fronts still for the rapid detection of variants. We're not out of this yet. Of course, to adapt the vaccines as necessary. Of course, fast-tracking regulatory approval, and also the upscaling of production. And this is, of course, very important now if we will need to have sort of adapted vaccines or novel vaccines to come out to deal with variants. So this is an important contributor, and which will feed in to the HERA as such. Next slide, please. So here is a little bit more information about the HERA Incubator and what we did specifically on the research side. So we mobilized an additional 120 million. This was the very first call under Horizon Europe. You know that the Horizon Europe had sort of recently been accepted. We were just about to start up to launch our normal work programs. And then we managed to organize this urgency call as well before the big machinery of Horizon Europe actually came into motion. And with this HERA Incubator call, we have actually identified 11 new projects that soon will start. They support clinical trials for new treatments and vaccines. So these are specific developments. Also to further support the cohort work, we had already started to invest in cohorts, but here we would like to support even further to build up these cohorts, because we know how important they are. And here in particular to build beyond Europe's border, to really set up international cohorts and to link with other cohorts that are set up across the world. And also to reinforce and widen the access to the research infrastructures, and of course, in particular, the COVID-19 data platform. And also we have other relevant research infrastructures, but I think that the COVID-19 data platform may be the most important to mention here. So these projects are now in the final stages of preparation, and their contracts will be signed very shortly. Next slide, please. Something new, and that was also realized and very much in the discussion of the HERA versus Corona plan that we agreed with the member states, was really to set up a better cooperation between the Commission and the national research funders, because what we have seen was, of course, everybody was very keen on investing very rapidly, and the coordination could have been better. We did what we could at the time, but we could do much, much better in the future. And we have therefore really started to work with the member states to set up a proper partnership on pandemic preparedness and see how we can better co-invest in preparedness research. So here member states have started to work already on this, and we have in our open call for proposal, we do have an opening to establish a secretariat for coordinating the future partnership here. And the nature of this partnership, we will remain to be seen. But the work has started on coming together, and this partnership will have 3 objectives: to improve Europe's preparedness, to prevent, predict, and respond to epidemics, develop a strategic research agenda on preparedness, and of course to build a European research area on pandemic preparedness. And naturally, will this partnership be a very important stepping stone for the future preparedness research that will support the future HERA. So this will be a very important work that we will do in the coming years to make sure that we have a good, solid partnership here with as many countries as possible participating, because we really would like to have as many as possible with us. And we talk about member states, but of course we have also other countries who want to collaborate with Europe, and they are very welcome to participate in this partnership. We already have the countries that are foreseen to be associated with Horizon Europe, and of course already we have Norway and Iceland are already part of this work, I would say. So next slide, please. So, well, with this, we say welcome to Ecraid. And I think here we really very much welcome the work that you have done and the efforts you have made to come together to set up this important project. It will also be a very important contributor to our pandemic preparedness work and to HERA as such. And we very much look forward to see the results. There are a few things that I would like to mention that we expect, because I think that they are so very important. The first one is, of course, the speed. What we have seen with COVID here, the expectancy on rapid delivery is amazing. We know from the political side, you know, the results should be delivered yesterday. So this is something that we hope will happen thanks to your project here. It will be less expensive, of course, to make sure that you know, they are done as efficiently and as appropriate as possible, and in particular to already have predefined clinical protocols, etc., which are discussed with the regulators. And the high qualities, of course, needless to say. And I think what's really, really important to reflect on here is that to be very, very attractive here, we know that industry are very used to work with CROs, and you basically need to get up into that speed and the attractiveness that they have, because we really would like to make Europe as attractive as possible for doing the clinical trials in Europe. Next slide, please. So indeed, so therefore we expect you to you know, engage well and rapidly with industry, and also to have a close collaboration with the European Medicines Agency. I think this is really, really important, and we have very high expectations, and we look very much forward to work closely with you and to make sure that the work that you do are well integrated, both with the pandemic preparedness partnership, but also, of course, also with the future HERA. So with that, I say thank you, and over to you, Herman.
Thank you very much, Irene, for a very nice presentation. And thank you also for sharing all these very interesting and exciting initiatives that are in the pipeline. Perhaps if let me maybe respond to some of the things that you were mentioning during your talk, Irene. So with regards to EDCTP in Africa, you're making indeed a very important point. We did have partnerships between Prepare and Pandora and Alert. And so I think we need to continue to work on that. And there are certainly opportunities there for synergies between the African networks and Ecraid. So that's an important message that you convey to all of us. With regards to the mechanism developed in the Trial Coordination Board, I can tell you that it works very well. This is a really great mechanism, and the really great discussions led by Jacques de Mot and John Rottinger, so that this is a really, really good mechanism. What we learned and what frustrated me a bit during the COVID-19 pandemic and when we were running the clinical trials was the lack of incentives, to be honest, of the member states to participate in some of our, let's say, trials. And as you know, I have been very frustrated by this, and I'm very, 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 very pleased to hear that there is also an initiative now to embark with the national research funders to also achieve a better coordination. And I think personally this should come from the very top. And I was actually trying to reach out even to the ministers of health to please ask the ministries of health to work with us, to support us. And that was something that I find personally very frustrating. So I hope that in the future, member states will be more engaged, because we have a lot of support from the European Commission, and we're very, very grateful to that. But I think we need to find a mechanism also in Ecraid how to better engage with the member states and get the support also from the member states. And personally, I think that's very important. And therefore, I was very happy to hear that this is now also an initiative to work with the national funds and also have achieve better coordination. And then, yeah, looking forward to the State of the Union tomorrow, and also more communication this week about HERA. This is of course very exciting, and I hope again that with what we are developing and what's in the pipeline, that we can contribute to some of the objectives, of course, of HERA. So these were just a few reflections. Irene, I don't know if there are any other comments or questions. I'm just looking at the chat. I don't see anything for the moment. So are there any questions for Irene or any comments about many things that were said during her presentation about the initiative of the European Commission? No? Okay. Good, Mark. Very informative, thanks. Yes, indeed, I agree, Mark. It was a really great talk. Good, Irene. So once again, very many exciting initiatives. Yeah, great opportunities for the future. Great opportunities for Europe, for European citizens. Many lessons to be learned, and I'm sure we will learn many lessons, and I'm sure you will do better. And I do hope that Europe will come out even better than ever before, and based on everything that we have learned. So, Irene, good luck with all the other work and also with HERA. And again, many thanks for joining today. Thank you, Irene.
Thank you so much, Herman. And if I could just say one word, I hope you have a mindset that you would contribute to make Europe the most attractive place to do clinical trials, because I think this is the goal that we all should work towards. And we should really jointly identify where there are challenges. You mentioned some in terms of, some countries not so interested maybe to support. And I think this is something that we really, could work on together and try to see, how to make sure that we have a very good integrated system and that is as attractive as possible for the countries to participate, and that we can, as I said, have the common goal to make Europe as attractive as possible for doing clinical trials.
Okay, thanks, Irene. Thank you very much for that.
Thank you. And good luck with the project, and enjoy the rest of the meeting.
Thank you, Irene. Thank you very much. All right, good. So let's move on. Let's move on then. This morning we learned a lot about the studies driven by Ecraid, and Mark explained the difference between Ecraid-driven, Ecraid-powered, and Ecraid-affiliated studies. There's a very clear distinction between the Ecraid-driven studies on the one hand, because they are owned by Ecraid and the future legal entity of Ecraid, and in Ecraid-driven studies, as you have realized this morning, there's an extensive use of the menu and of the services and of the infrastructure and also of the branding. So that's really very clear cut, and it defines very nicely what is an Ecraid-driven study. And then on the other hand, we have Ecraid-powered and Ecraid-affiliated study. And there, the distinction between Ecraid-powered and Ecraid-affiliated is less distinctive, I should say. And we will start first with the studies that are enabled by Ecraid, that are enabled or powered by Ecraid, and then after the break we'll finish with the Ecraid affiliate study. And what it means, enabled, is that It's not owned by the Ecraid legal entity, not by the Ecraid Foundation, but it's owned by the sponsor, and it is a minimal use of the Ecraid menu and services, the infrastructure, and the brands. And that, of course, can fluctuate in time, but that's basically what distinguishes Ecraid driven from Ecraid, let's say, enabled and Ecraid affiliated studies. So it's my great pleasure to welcome Carlo Giaquinto. We were visionary in setting up Ecraid many years back, but Carlo was even more visionary than we were, because he already thought about this in the 1990s, setting up Penda, and then eventually in 2008, setting up Penta ID, thinking of an infrastructure for clinical research in pediatrics. So therefore, it's great to welcome Carlo. He's also a very strong partner and strongly supports Ecraid, as you have realized this morning, and he will give us the next 5 minutes a short introduction on another new kid on the block, VERDI. Carlo.
Thank you very much, Herman, and thanks, Mark, as well, for giving us the opportunity to present VERDI, but not just the opportunity to be at this meeting, but also for the opportunity really to be part of the Ecraid family. I've been, as you mentioned this morning, I've been part of the group since the very beginning as representative of the pediatric network, the Penta, and for sure, VERDI, has been really an outcome of this strong collaboration. Why VERDI? VERDI is one of the projects which has been selected for funding, and we are about to sign the contract under the HERA Incubator that Irene just presented. And we call it VERDI because we're very close with orchestra, which is a project which has been, is coordinated and funded by Evelina Corneli. And we have really, let's say, not extrapolate, but develop a complementary activities really to focus on variant evaluation in children and in pregnant women. So we are here really to be played by orchestra, or let's say to make music together. And so why children and pregnant women? We know that children are generally asymptomatic for COVID, but we know that they transmit very well the infection. I mean, in Italy, this week, 50% of new COVID infection were below 18 years of age. They were excluded from vaccination, especially below 12 now. And on the other hand, just very few pregnant women for the vaccine hesitancy are really getting vaccinated. And many other studies cannot identify pregnant women and exclude children. And finally, children really really had a devastating effect, suffer of a devastating effect of the epidemic, not because they became sick, but socially because they weren't able to go to school. So the pediatric population is a crucial one. So the next one. So these are really the objective of VERDI. We want really to track the estimation of the occurrence and spread of the new variants among pregnant women and children, then to advance and understand the impact of these emerging variants through different modeling on their transmissibility, on the risk factors, on the impact on the disease, but also on the effectiveness of vaccination, and really from the result of this study, really to recommend what are the best strategies to vaccinate children and pregnant women in the overall context of the epidemic. So the next one. So this is really the work plan. We are really going to understand the implication for the vaccination. Of course, to look at, first of all, we want to track and characterize the impact of different variants in different cohorts. And I will show you what type of cohorts we have. I will show it very briefly. Then really going to look at comorbidity, hospitalization, treatment, long COVID and death, and the impact of the variants of death, vaccine, and also understanding the impact of different variants on transmission. The next one. So in terms of participating cohort, and this is probably one of the most innovative approach that we had. We had both national and regional population courts, and we have very large administrative database from the UK, from Israel. We collaborate with the CLALIT study, where, as you can see, include millions of people. We do work with the Norwegian National Registry and the Western Cape Province, where we are able really to collect data on millions of children, and with the individual patient linkage with the lab data and the sequencing performing in this country, we will be able really to address the different objectives of the project at the school level, at the vaccine, pregnancy, and also develop some biobanking. The next one, together with the national population course, we do have other population court or networks. We do work very closely with the recovered household transmission study that we are going to extend outside of Europe, and Patricia is going to lead this study. And then we're going to work directly with countries in Haiti, in Thailand, and in South Africa. Plus, we are going to work with existing network like the Diamond Network, which can collect data from other countries in Asia and in Africa. So the next one. So this is really the global distribution based on the characteristic of the courts, whether the national or regional courts, the household court, and the school court and the hospital-based court in the different countries. So we were really able, I think, in this, we are aiming to be able to optimize to use of resources, and especially the use of local resources and local skill. The next one, this is really the partnership. As you can see, we have 22 partners from all around the world, but some of these partners are really the gateway for the for larger global network. So thank you very much. Thanks again. And of course, we are very, very open to collaboration as close as possible with all of you.
Thank you very much, Carlo. That was indeed just a brief introduction of the VERDI proposal. And I should also say, I mean, you've seen now that this is a fantastic proposal, and this is the first and only proposal that I'm aware that received a maximum score of 15, Carlo. So
15 out of 15. Because I think that we were talking about children and pregnancy at the right time, where all the media were for Vardi.
No, you're too modest. You're too modest, Carlo. No, it's a fantastic proposal. So good luck with the contract negotiations, and yeah, I look forward to collaborate, for instance, through the household study in Recover and some of the other studies. So thank you very much, Carlo.
Thanks to you all. All
right, so Julia has a hard stop at 3 o'clock, right, Julia?
plus five. I
thought you didn't tell me. Okay, so yeah, it's of course a great pleasure to introduce Julia Bielicki, who's working at the University of Basel. We've worked together for many years, and always enjoyed working together with Julia. And she will be talking about the Neo-IPC project. Julia.
Thank you. So thank you very much for giving us the opportunity, well, me and the team, some of whom are here today, to just briefly present this project to you. You can see that this is a project that also involves Carlo, because it focuses on the neonatal setting and really focuses on infection prevention and control in that setting. As you can see, I've listed, for those of you who maybe don't have that much experience of the neonatal intensive care unit environment, why this is a particularly important problem in this setting. So we are providing a very high rate of at-risk care. So we have babies that are at high risk. We have a lot of devices on the unit. And you can see that one of them, the very typical image of the NICU, is an incubator. And as you can imagine, an incubator can not only incubate babies, it can also incubate pathogens. So you can see that there's a perfect storm in this type of environment. There's much greater crowding. Again, you can see that incubators are generally close to each other, and there's accompanying carers that are present, and they're not optional. They need to be there, particularly mothers, as part of the therapeutic process. Care requires a lot of contact between the carers, the staff, and the babies. And an element that I find quite interesting is that there's absolutely no yuck factor involved, which is something that is very different from adults. So for whatever reason, being peed upon by a small baby weighing 500 grams is much less unpleasant than the same thing happening to you when you are involved in the care of an adult. And if we go on to the next slide, we can see that actually this is not just a theoretical risk, but hospital-acquired infections are actually very important and affect neonates and children quite extensively. Although the absolute rate, which I haven't included here, is lower, the types of infections that we see are generally more severe. And this is data that was analyzed from the ECDC HERA by one of the collaborators also present here today, Walter Zingg. And you can see that particularly in the less than 1 month old that we would be focusing on, the dominant type of hospital-acquired infection is a bloodstream infection, which may be culture positive or negative. So this is actually also something that carries a great burden in this setting. If we move on to the next slide, you can also see that just comparing adult and neonatal ICUs, there's quite a different distribution of pathogens in these settings. So the top two panels are the adult ICUs. On the left-hand side, it's the healthcare environment. On the right-hand side is the patient. And at the bottom, you can see the NICU, again, with the healthcare environment and the patient. And for example, the top line is Acinetobacter baumannii isolates. Then in the middle, you can see Klebsiella. Right at the bottom is Staph epidermidis. But in general, what you can see is that the pattern of colonization in the neonatal intensive care unit shifts towards a heavier colonization, so for more frequent detection of all pathogens really, but particularly the troubling gram negatives like Klebsiella and the non-fermenters. And indeed, this is also something we observe on the individual patient level. If we go on to the next slide, where we have a high risk of resistant bacterial colonization in the NICU, particularly in high prevalence settings, which makes total sense. It's where colonization pressure is highest. These are data from Thailand, and you can see that following babies who are still on the unit throughout the course of their stay, by day 20, respectively by day 14, depending on what type of resistant gram negatives you look at, all of the babies that are still on the unit are colonized. And this is something that we have seen in some high-income country settings as well. But this is not limited as a problem to colonization. If we go on to the next slide, again, this is data from high prevalence settings, which luckily we're not there yet, and we're hoping Neo-IPC will help to devise strategies so we don't get to this place. This is a birth cohort from India, from 3 hospitals, following nearly 14,000 babies to identify babies who develop clinical sepsis. And you can see on the left-hand side at the bottom, the case fatality rate for those with culture positive sepsis in this setting was nearly 50%. So every other baby of those 840 babies with culture positive sepsis died in this cohort. And you can see that actually the same pathogens that we just identified as problematic colonizers are also the ones that are problematic in the invasive infections. And in fact, in the right-hand table, you can see that there's a very high rate of resistant gram-negatives in particular, and that case fatality rates for these babies are extremely high. So with this preamble, I would like to just talk about the main aims of Neo-IPC. If we move on, please. It's really a kind of combined project to invest in building a platform to support high quality research in neonatal IPC, but also infection management. And it also has a sort of implementation science component where we want to bring together interested stakeholders and units to get them to work together in a clinical practice network, so we can get some greater engagement with infection prevention and control in this setting, and use this platform also as a dissemination vehicle. So the next slide shows you the general structure of the project, which has the typical kind of structure that you have in any European project, with several work packages. And you can see that the core is really a trial. Again, there's several of you who are on the core who are involved in this, coupled with some innovative microbiological work. And this is embedded in a platform that builds surveillance and implementation features to help us improve infection prevention and control in neonatal intensive care, mainly in Europe, but also globally. And this brings me to my next slide, which is our consortium map. Oh, actually, there you go. We've got our RCT as a trialist. Of course, I couldn't help but incorporate this as well. And we've just heard some discussion around the fact that actually clinical trials network are very important. So we want to embed a cluster randomized controlled trial in the sites that are going to be part of this project. This is quite an ambitious kind of trial, and something that our sites don't yet have much experience of. So we're hoping to work with them to help them implement such a trial. And actually this is co-led with the team from the UMCU, which is also obviously a central team for Ecraid as a whole. Now we get onto our consortium map, and you can see that again, picking up the discussion that we've had around, for example, the changes in EDCTP funding. If you go on one slide, you can see that this has been designed already with this in mind. So you can see a map of Europe here, but if you look at the bottom left-hand corner, we have collaborators from Stellenbosch University, with whom we also collaborate on various other projects, including EDCTP funded projects through Penta, and we've been able to involve them and get them on board for this particular project to really expand the kind of remit of this European project to already look towards a more global relevance and implementation of the types of activities that we'll be working on. And finally, I would like to finish with a slide just on some synergies between Neo-IPC and Ecraid, because what Herman started off with about affiliated and sort of co-run projects, I guess, with Ecraid was something that I spent a few minutes thinking about as well. So, I mean, the most obvious synergies are that several partners from the Ecraid network are directly involved also as work package leads in Neo-IPC. But I think more generally, it's an area that might be of interest for the Ecraid portfolio of kind of areas to focus on, because it's really a major problem globally, and is also of interest to a lot of industry partners thinking about a more public-private partnership type of approach. It's a very suitable area to build a model for childhood projects within Ecraid, because it's a very defined setting, so we can really test run how we link these different types of projects with each other. And I've already stressed that it's also relevant to low and middle income countries, which really opens up this area to a large range of projects and also funding streams. I'll be very happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Julia. So yeah, indeed, another example of synergies between pediatric clinical research and Ecraid. Huh? Yeah, absolutely. Are there any questions for Julia? Still a couple of minutes. Any questions? Yeah. Not always easy. Mark. Yes, Mark.
Hello, Julia. Thank you for the presentation. Can you imagine that Neo-IPC could, let's say, evolve into an adaptive platform trial with multiple questions addressed in the future?
Yeah, I mean, I think one would have to potentially take a step via this model of the perpetual observational study or a kind of running cohort and build on top of that. I say that because the neonatal setting is a very peculiar setting. The neonatologists are very protective of their patients. They're very conservative people. They don't like a lot of change. So I think that would need some work together with them. But I think at the same time, you know, they are a group, the neonatal age group is a group that has actually done some of the largest trials in pediatrics in general. So I do think, because it's a very structured setting, that it would lend itself very well to eventually evolve into a sort of adaptive platform trial. And there's a lot of questions, obviously, that would also lend themselves to this sort of way of addressing them in a research setting. Yeah, we'd be very keen to work with Ecraid to find some funding for that, because I think that would be a crucial problem that one would have to address before embarking on that journey.
So when we launched Prepare in 2014, we had a lot of discussions also about adaptive platform trials in children. With I think Carlo was part of the discussion, and Federico Martinon was also part of that. Yeah. And remember, Carlo?
Yes, I do remember, yes.
Yeah, but in the end, we decided not to include children for many, many reasons. Some of them were mentioned already by Julia, but also in terms of ethical approval and design. And setting up such a study was considered quite challenging. So in the end, we didn't do it, Julia.
Yeah, I mean, we're doing quite a lot of work now, particularly around the neonatal setting, also because of the work that we're doing mainly in sub-Saharan Africa and Southeast Asia around different types of consent models, because there is a barrier to engaging, but it's mainly actually clinicians in this type of research and regulators. I think that actually the problem is less on the side of the parents. I think if you can provide good explanations for why you're doing what you're doing, actually families are generally not that averse to trials in this very vulnerable population. And again, if you think about respiratory management, it's actually a very well-studied population in these types of interventional trials.
Okay.
Yes, and also we do have the IMEI funded the C4C project, which is a very large project for European Pediatric Clinical Trial Network.
Yeah, but there are no platform trials in C4C, right?
Not at the moment, no.
No.
But Mark, I'd be keen to work on that.
Yes.
Just to clarify the considerations then in 2015, when REMAP-CAP not even had its name, let alone its design, was it would be complicated enough to set something up like that for adults only.
Exactly.
That proved correct in the end, but I think now it's time to look further.
Yeah, I agree.
Thanks.
Yep. Good. All right, Julia, you have to leave. I have a meeting at 3, so wonderful, and thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Yeah, bye, Julia. Bye. Good, and then it's my pleasure to welcome our next speaker, Oliver Cornelis. He's at the University of Cologne. Oliver was actually one of the 10 co-authors of the high-level design plan that was published in November 2016 on Ecraid, and Oliver was present at the very first meeting where we discussed Ecraid, I think in May 2016, Oliver. So he was there from the very beginning, and he's now the coordinator of one of the flagships project, I should say, in Europe, VACCELERATE. So Oliver, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Herman and Mark, for the invitation. And it's great to see, well, to say happy birthday to Ecraid. And so let me briefly introduce VACCELERATE. And since you said it's about the clinical trials, but VACCELERATE might not be known to everybody, so I will say a few words on VACCELERATE and then rush through 3 clinical trials. And in 10 minutes, I will be done. So next slide, please. Thank you. So the VACCELERATE priorities are, and that is what the European Commission asked from us, is address the top unmet public health needs. And so what we did is we polled what are these needs, and actually we do have, of course, a work package that works on public health needs specifically. And our poll resulted in 3 things, and that is, what is the impact of a heterologous third dose, which is now, everybody's talking about third dose now, but this poll was actually a couple of months ago. And so it's a very valid question. And our first trial would address this one. Then the second one was, what's the optimal timing of such a third dose, and is it needed at all? And number 3 was single and reduced vaccine doses for pediatric and adolescent populations. So on the next slide, I will briefly well, I apparently go right into the clinical trials, and that is the master protocol on booster strategies in adults is the overarching protocol for the 2 adult studies. So for polling results number 1 and 2, and the primary objective in the master protocol is to evaluate the immune response against wild type SARS-CoV-2 of different booster strategies in already vaccinated individuals. So that's where the third dose comes in. And you might ask yourself, why wild type? Because we hardly see wild type these days. There are several reasons. One reason is that this is what the current vaccines are licensed for, actually. And then all the other interesting questions we do have in the secondary objectives and in exploratory objectives, and the most interesting likely is the evaluation of immune response against variants of concern. And then, of course, we do have safety in there, because with the third dose, you do not necessarily for all combinations know what will happen and what will be the reactogenicity and will there be any safety issues. The primary endpoint is defined by the rate of a 2-fold antibody titer increase measured by anti-RBD ELISA against wild type, as said, and that will be 14 days after third dose, although the individual trials might last longer, and then we would follow well, I'm always saying patients, but it's not actually true. So we will follow the volunteers for a whole year in the first study, and you will see that on further slides. Next one, please. Third dose in the elderly. So that is, we have that general question on third dose, but we want to focus with that study on 75-year-olds or older. And again, the aim is pretty clear. So what is the immune response elicited by that third dose? And the on the next slide, you would see this is much clearer, I think, once you realize what BMNA is. That's the 3 companies producing these vaccines. So BioNTech, Pfizer, Moderna, and AstraZeneca. If we want to study third dose, then it's relatively easy. We do not need to stratify, because the stratification has already been done. Because everybody who will be eligible for a third dose trial apparently had his first and second dose. And for this trial, we would only allow in those who received a homologous scheme, so 2 times the same vaccine, and that should be at least 6 months ago. And then we would randomize these three. I call them for the last time now strata, because they are not really strata, but we would randomize then to give them a third dose with one of the two licensed mRNA vaccines. And immediately before we do so, we will take a blood sample to see what's our baseline immunity, and then we would do consecutive sampling at day 14. That's for the primary endpoint, and we will have an interim analysis on that one once we have 50% enrolled. And then after 3 and 6 and 12 months, end of study. And then the final analysis, of course. Each of these 6, let's call them groups, I guess, so it's not necessarily 6 arms, will be 100 patients, so it's 600 in total, and this will be done in 6 to 8 to 9 countries roughly. And we just are about to receive ethics approval. On Thursday, it was an ethics committee, and they didn't have a lot of questions, and actually somehow spread the word that we are doing this study, and many of the retired former employees are now approaching me and they say, I'm 75, so I want to be on that study. It's kind of funny and very encouraging. So the next slide already leads over then to the sub-protocol 2, which is on the perfect timing of that third dose. So while in sub-protocol 1, we do the 6 to 12 months, so 9 months plus minus 3 is the timing there. But in sub-protocol 2, that exactly is the study question: when to give that third dose, and actually, shall we give it or not? So the primary objectives and everything is very similar to what I just went through with you for the master protocol and for sub-protocol 1. And so we can just go to the next slide. And what you see here is a timeline now from the top to the bottom. And while at the top, we do like fainting 2 syringes under the word vaccinations. You can see that, I guess, close to the VACCELERATE logo. That's the 2 injections that these people already had. And now they're here of the clinical trial, and time is going by. And at month 9, or week 39 plus minus, which is now to the left, in the middle of the slide, to the left of the red line, that's where we would randomize, enroll and randomize. And then these vaccinees will either receive nothing else except for testing their and determining their immune reaction, and it always humoral and cellular always refers to both parts, or they will be randomized to receiving a vaccine, and that would be done right away, or after 3 additional months, or 6 or 9 additional months. So in the end, we compare 4 groups, that is no third dose versus third dose in month 9, or 12, or 15, or 18. And by the way, the no third dose will be a comparator group to sub-protocol 1 as well. And yeah, that's the story of sub-protocol 2. So please move on to the next. Yeah, there it says in writing what I just went through. Thank you. Okay, so now turning to the third protocol, which is the pediatric population, and number 2 and 3 are likely to be submitted later this month or beginning next month. And by the way, what I forgot to mention and is that sub-protocol 2 is, of course, a whole group of people behind it, but the chairs driving it are Paddy Mellon from Dublin University and from Bern, the statistician of Sventrelle, and who are behind that complex but very interesting and very up-to-date concept of sub-protocol 2. The pediatric study actually is driven by Patricia Browning from Utrecht, and she leads that group with input from, of course, all the other pediatricians and all the other experts that you need to set up the study, and Patricia's in the lead. So This is about the optimized vaccination regimens for adolescents. So this is 12 to 17 here. And by minimizing the risk of side effects, because if you have a small 12-year-old, then you may not need the adult dose. You may, well, give more than you need for the immunogenicity, and you might give more than you need for reactogenicity, so more side effects, more adverse events. And we would base on the currently evidence-based vaccination regimen and then modify these. That is what Patricia suggests and will do. So the overall question, could a reduced dosing schedule lower reactogenicity while maintaining immunogenicity at adequate levels, 12 to 16 years of age? Next, please. That's the groups. And if you first not look at the table, but at the footnotes there, it says the A and superscript B are subjects without evidence of infection at enrollment and with evidence. So that is people who, or children and adolescents who went through a SARS corona infection, and that's the B ones. And then different approaches are tested, controls and intervention arms with a first and a second dose of 30 micrograms, so the currently licensed dose. And for these two groups with and without prior infection, and then intervention arms for those with prior infection with 20 or 30 micrograms, and these would not receive a second dose then. Next slide, please. That's the Cologne team. Actually, this is a constantly changing slide because the team is getting larger and larger. And more experts coming on board. And if the entire VACCELERATE team would be on the slide, you couldn't read anything because it would be 150 scientists active in VACCELERATE, and many of those who dialed in are participating today in the meeting, and almost 500, it's 475 sites now where clinical trials could be executed, and it's about 260 pediatric sites with the help of Carlo, of course, in here, and the other pediatricians, and a bit more are sites where adult clinical trials could be run. Thank you very much, and follow the group. Follow us on VACCELERATE on Twitter. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks. Thank you very much, Oliver. And so you might have to be wondering why, what is the link there with Ecraid, and why is it one of the enabled studies? That's because Oliver invited us with the ClinNet and LabNet infrastructure to join the consortium. So that's where the link is with what we're building at Ecraid and VACCELERATE. And it's been a real pleasure to work with Oliver and his team in Cologne.
Thank you, Herman, for that addition. That's where the link is. Yes, I mean, there are multiple links, but
yeah, sure.
That's where the very clear link is. And we are super happy that we, of course, could tap into the LabNet and ClinNet, and with VACNet, what at some point, Mark said that at some point.
That sounds like a good idea, yes, indeed. All right. Are there any questions for Oliver? Interesting trial designs, and there was a lot of discussion, Oliver, about this trial design. So very interesting.
Yeah, one thing is that there was a discussion on whether the third dose should be subject of a trial. It was it was a serious discussion, because when we thought, well, what's a reasonable study with all the planning that it needs before the study then finally starts? So what is the study question, or one of the study questions that have not been answered in 6 months from now? That is what we ask ourselves in March. So, and I think so far we did good, because we it is a valid question, and it has not been answered yet. And you might have seen on the booster doses, the recent Lancet publication that was just one of the most highlighted publications, I guess, of today and yesterday, since it was published yesterday. Yeah.
Indeed, indeed. Okay, Oliver, I don't see any questions in the chat box. Yeah, and again, these kind of meetings is difficult to have interaction. So, but it was great to have you on board, Oliver. Thank you for sharing the progress of the VACCELERATE project, and yeah, good luck with the trials. They're very, very important. All right, so then we'll finish with the REVERSE project, and it's my pleasure to welcome Walter Zingg. So Walter is work at University of Geneva Hospitals. His background is pediatrics, infectious diseases, and more particularly infection prevention. And Walter has been coordinating several European projects. And the one that comes to my mind, Walter, I think is Prohibit. You were the coordinator to that one, huh?
Yes, that's true.
Yes. And so he's not going to talk about Prohibit, but he's going to talk about REVERSE. Walter.
Yes, thank you very much. And it's an honor to be part of the Ecraid platform. So REVERSE, next slide, please. So what is REVERSE about? Well, REVERSE is a mixed method project in 24 acute care hospitals in 4 European countries where we find high prevalence of multi-drug resistant organisms. And basically the idea behind REVERSE is that it is also a reality check study in the sense that let us throw, to simply said, let us throw everything at the problem and really try to make a difference there. And we know basically that, at least in Europe, that multi-drug resistant organisms, or let's say that healthcare associated transmission, what happens in hospitals, are the drivers, the main drivers actually in multi-drug resistant organisms, which has been nicely shown by Haya Grundmann's group once for KPC producing Klebsiella pneumonia recently. And so this is basically what's behind it. Next slide, please. So it is the concept of REVERSE that reducing antimicrobial resistance in acute care hospitals can be achieved. Well, first of all, can it be achieved? But if it can be achieved, it's certainly only be able to have it in a collaborative approach where various activities interact together in a large clinical trial. And this is basically the core of REVERSE. Next slide, please. There are a number of aims. I mean, first of all, of course, to design and evaluate this integrated modular strategy of evidence-based intervention programs that can be implemented in hospitals where found in high AMR prevalence settings. Then it is also to design and evaluate a tailored, enhanced implementation strategy versus a standard basic implementation strategy. I'll come back to that later. To estimate also cost effectiveness of the intervention program. It's also one of the work packages. And finally, to develop recommendations and implementation strategies in Europe, but that also can be drawn to low middle income countries, which also one of the work packages looking into that, and also to obtain a change of the local organizational way of working in the participating hospitals and to engage them also in the future. So the hope is that those hospitals somehow become a reference network in the participating countries. Next slide, please. So the study design is a cluster randomized stepwise design with interventions over 30 months, which a total duration for the participating hospitals a bit more than 45 months, and which is first of all a baseline, and then we have a randomized starting point with the same sequence of interventions, which is a microbiology and diagnostic stewardship. I'll come back to that later, infection prevention and control program, and an antibiotic stewardship program. Next slide, please. Together, the work packages, as I was mentioning before, they revolve, so to speak, around this clinical trial in the 24 hospitals, and with the interventions I just mentioned. I come back to that later. And then there is also a strong implementation activity in one of the work packages, and as I also mentioned already, the economic effectiveness evaluation. So next slide, please. So what are the interventions? Just briefly, diagnostic stewardship. Basically, there are two arms of that. First of all, there are prevalence surveys where we want to know what colonizations of adults in acute care hospitals with multi-drug resistant organisms, but also to help hospitals to ramp up diagnostics in order to be capable of identifying multi-drug resistant organisms, well, to identifying healthcare associated infections due to multi-drug resistant organisms. Next slide, please. The infection prevention and control intervention has different levels. A first level, which aims to establish what we consider state-of-the-art, standard precaution measures, hand hygiene, basic environmental hand hygiene, but then also next level, we aim to establish MDRO screening at admission and in high-risk units, reinforce contact precautions and so on, and then a more drug-based approach with decolonization or decontamination of colonized patients and molecular analysis and sequencing of isolates for outbreak investigation. Next slide. The antibiotic stewardship follows more or less the lines we already know. So best practice programs focusing on organization structure and available microbiology, but also where possible to implement some technical interventions like molecular characterization of resistance genes, screening of patients in high-risk areas, personalized surgical prophylaxis and rapid molecular testing. Then next slide, please. There is some novelties. However, this is how we do implementation. We aim to establish what is called a type 2 hybrid effectiveness implementation trial. That means that we will randomize hospitals into two arms where we have let's say, a standard implementation support, but then there is also an enhanced implementation support where we really go on site. We establish with the hospitals a tailored approach and help them to implement all the different interventions. Next slide, please. And then there is this cost effectiveness analysis, which starts with a systematic review on cost effectiveness on the different interventions I just mentioned, and also looks then at microcosting of interventions implementation, quality of life estimations, and also then aims to extrapolate the findings to low and middle income countries. Next slide, please. The primary outcome is a composite outcome, which is an incidence density of HEIs due to CRE, carbapenem-resistant Pseudomonas aeruginosa and carbapenem-resistant Acinetobacter baumannii combined. And then we have a range of secondary outcomes, like generally HEI due to multi-drug resistant organisms, and then incidence densities of Clostridium difficile infections. Then we have some process indicators. And also we look at antimicrobial use generally, and certainly antimicrobial consumption, and of course all cause in-hospital mortality. Next slide, please. This is the consortium bringing together different participants from different countries. I mentioned that the clinical studies in Spain, Italy, Greece, and Romania, but you also have in the consortium partners from the Netherlands, from the UK, and from Switzerland. The next slide, please. With this, I would like to thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to address some questions if you have. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Walter, for introducing us to the REVERSE project. And again, you see the link there with the clinical trials in the hospital. So thank you very much for that, Walter. Running a little bit late, but maybe there is a burning question. If somebody wants to raise his hand or her hand, or has a question, can put it in the chat box. Just waiting for a few seconds. I don't see any questions, Walter. So if you have a question later on for Walter, you can always put it in the chat box, and then I'm sure he will respond to that. All right, so thank you very much. We're running a few minutes late, but I still would like to propose to have a short break. Marco, I see that you are online. Marco?
I am.
Hello, Marco. Great to see you. Marco, is it okay if we start at 35 and we have a 10 minutes break?
That's perfect.
Super. All right, so 10 minutes break, or let's say 12 minutes break, and we will start again at 35. So thank you very much.